Welcome back to the exam preparation video series for DP-300, Administrating Microsoft Azure SQL Solutions. I'm Sara, a Microsoft Technical Trainer. This is the fourth episode out of the total 5 episodes in this series. In this episode, we'll focus on configuring and managing automation of tasks. We will cover how to create and manage SQL Server Agent jobs, automate deployment of database resources, create and manage database tasks in Azure. Here's a list of all the different skills you may be tested on. These are sometimes referred to as the may include, meaning they may or may not be on the exam. This list isn't exhaustive, and while we won't be covering every skill in this video, be sure you can perform these skills before taking the exam. So, starting off with SQL Server Agent schedules, which are critical for automating maintenance jobs, and understanding how to manage them is key for the DP-300 exam. Key areas to focus on here is available schedules, how it lists all the job schedules owned by the job owner, jobs in the schedule, which shows which jobs are attached to a specific schedule, and also the properties, which allow us to modify those schedule settings, including frequency and execution times. So be aware that a single schedule can be shared across multiple jobs, but modifying it will affect all jobs that use it. Don't confuse also SQL Agent job schedules with SQL Agent alerts, which trigger actions based on system events rather than time-based execution. SQL Server Agent and Azure Monitor also here provide essential alerts for job failures, errors, and performance issues. So just know the different ways to configure those alerts, either through the Azure portal, CLI, PowerShell, or even the REST API. Be aware of when to use SQL Server Agent alerts versus Azure Monitor alerts. These alerts, agent ones, are based on SQL Server conditions. Azure Monitor just gives us infrastructure-wide alerting. SQL Server Agent jobs also are critical for automating tasks, but troubleshooting failures is also really just as important to know. So know the 2 main ways to diagnose and fix issues, either using Job Activity Monitor or using something like the SSMS. Be aware that Job Activity Monitor is for real-time job status, while SSMS properties just help us configure error notifications. So if you have troubleshooting job failures, just always check agent logs or job history and those error messages before making any changes. Next, infrastructure as code. Again, another key concept for the exam. Know how to deploy resources with both ARM templates and Bicep. Don't mistake Bicep as a replacement for ARM. It actually compiles down to ARM templates. And if you're comfortable with ARM templates, you can just try converting them to Bicep in a lab environment to reinforce your understanding before the exam. Another important key tool is PowerShell. We use this to automate Azure SQL management. So expect questions on the commands like new Azure SQL database. Understand the verb-noun structure. So in front of you here, this command creates a new database on a specific server. Also be aware of the optional parameters. You might get questions that test whether you understand those default values versus explicit configurations. Also, a must-know tool, Azure CLI, for automating resources deployment and also including VMs and SQL servers. So understand the basic command structure. Here again, the first command creates a resource group. The second command deploys a virtual machine with a specific operating system image and admin credentials. Be aware of those required parameters like resource group, name, and image. You may be tested on which flags are mandatory versus optional. Automating deployments is also just the first step. Monitoring them is important and it helps optimum performance. So know the difference between monitoring methods. We have runbooks, which use Azure Automation to track those job execution status and find potential failures. And we have monitoring using Elastic Jobs, which is ideal for managing multiple databases. Be aware of those monitoring tools available for SQL automation and expect questions on when to use Azure Monitor, runbooks, or Elastic Jobs for troubleshooting those failures. So we've covered monitoring with elastic jobs. Now let's focus on creating and configuring them. Those elastic jobs allow you to automate tasks across multiple databases. So make sure you are aware of the process steps. And also be aware of these key considerations for the exam. How to set up credentials correctly, because jobs need authentication, and also how to limit concurrency, because running against too many databases can also impact performance. Following up on elastic job, now let's focus on automating database tasks using Azure Automation. Again, Azure Automation allows for process automation, configuration management, and governance. And the great thing is it supports both Azure and on-prem VMs for automating database-related tasks. So just be aware of those key Azure automation components. Again, those runbooks, those scripts that define the process, schedules which define when those automation runs, and the credentials that help us authenticate for those automation tasks. And finally, modules, those PowerShell or Python modules which extend those capabilities. Additionally, remember that we also use Azure Policy. It plays an important role here in enforcing governance and ensuring those resources comply with security and operational requirements. Once this automation is in place, it's crucial also to configure alerts and notifications to monitor those database tasks effectively. So operators, notifications, and alerts, you need to know the difference. Also be aware of the different alert types. We have metric values, log search queries, and also activity log events. So keep those also in mind. We have Azure Platform Health. So for the exam, expect questions on configuring metric alerts in Azure Monitor. As you can see, monitoring is key to ensuring automated database tasks run smoothly. So know the two key areas to monitor: runbooks, elastic jobs, which we mentioned, and how they're monitored through Azure Portal, PowerShell, or T-SQL. So for the exam, expect questions on troubleshooting those automation failures, and be aware of those common failure points like misconfigured alerts, missing retry policies, and also know where to look. Azure Monitor or Log Analytics, or am I looking at something like automation logs? So to recap, in this episode, we discussed how to create and manage SQL Server Agent jobs, automate deployment of database resources, create and manage database tasks in Azure. Remember, this group accounts for 15 to 20% of the exam, so keep that in mind when preparing for the exam. Thank you for watching episode 4 on configuring and managing automation of tasks, and be sure to join us for episode 5, where we will cover planning and configuring high availability and disaster recovery environment.